Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Carol, we can hear you clear.
Yeah, I'm now trying to ask Prince to help me, and because I'm trying to see if I can share my screen already.
You should be able to. Just, you want to do a test?
Yes, please.
Okay, go for it.
Sure. Are you able to see it now?
It's starting. It's coming through.
Yes, it's coming up.
The big files.
It's still coming through. Yeah. Yes, perfect. We can see it now.
So is it evident? Is it clear? Are you having the first one?
Yes, we can see the first slide now.
Is it a slide screen or just the whole thing?
It's the whole thing. If you can make it
okay.
Presentation, there we go.
So I will now, okay.
Excellent. Good.
So I stop sharing, right?
Yes, yes, it has. Okay,
have you started your own?
I'm starting it now.
Okay. Are you able to do that too?
Good morning, Carolyn.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah. I was just wondering if it's possible for you to put the camera down a bit so that we can see your full face.
Okay, can you see me now?
Just a little bit more. We can see remaining your chin. Yeah, okay. This is better.
Thank you.
This is better. Okay. Thank you. But it keeps going back down. I don't know why.
Because I'm in my computer and that's what we're trying to do to see if we can use the video conference room.
All right.
But anyway, it will be away because I'm going to have a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah. Okay. Put it on later. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon for those who are joining us from East Africa. It's time now for us to start, but I see that we are only about 41 participants now, and since we are expecting more, perhaps we should wait for another 2 minutes so that more people can join and then we can start. Thank you.
It's good it's not having feedback. Okay. I just need to make sure that I have. Let's try to use that. I need to move that.
Okay, welcome everybody. Patience, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, we have 62 participants now. Can we start, or do we still wait for a few minutes? Because we'll be having we're expecting more than 100. With 63, it's not so much. What do you think?
I think we should just start Patience, because we still are struggling to get data to everybody, and so we just have to record, and if people can't make it onto the platform, they'll have to get the recordings afterwards. Okay, unfortunately, the data distribution system is extremely complex.
Yeah.
So I think let's move, and then people will join if they can. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Based on your advice, I think we should start. So again, welcome to day 3 of our course on sustainability starts with teachers. And we want to welcome all participants joining us from the 3 countries for this program, that is Eswatini, Malawi, and Tanzania. Today, we will be focusing on the course webinar, and we have 2 distinguished experts from our partnering organization, and that is UNESCO Regional Office for Southern Africa and Rhodes University, to take care of these the issues that will be addressed in these discussions on our panel today. First, let me introduce the first speaker, and that is my head of unit, and that is Ms. Carolyn Medel-Anonuevo. Ms. Carolyn Medel-Anonuevo is the head of the education unit of the UNESCO Regional Office for Southern Africa, and since January 2015. The office is covering 9 countries, as you know, and that is Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Prior to her assignment in Southern Africa, she was the deputy director at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, and this is a UNESCO Category 1 institute in Hamburg, Germany. During her 22-year period at the institute, she worked on areas relating to gender, youth, and skills development, literacy and non-formal education, HIV preventive education, and in non-formal settings, and also issues relating to citizenship education. Before joining UNESCO in 1993, she was an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, teaching sociology and other social science subjects. She was also involved in a wide range of research commissioned by the World Bank, UNIFEM, now UN Women, UNICEF, and ILO in the area of urban poor women, child labor, international migration, and youth studies. Simultaneously, she was also the director at the Center of Women Resource, a nationwide NGO involved in training and research on women's issues, where she sharpened her popular education and training skills. As the current head of UNESCO Regional Office for Southern Africa, I'm pleased to invite Ms. Carolyn to present her keynote address on education transformation in SADC. Please, Ms. Carolyn, take it away.
Thank you very much, Patience, for your kind words. Let me I am just trying to resolve my... Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yes, much better, Carolyn. There's no feedback now.
Thank you. So I am asking Prince to share the screen. Good morning to everybody. I hope everybody's excited in this first substantial discussion on transformation for education in the SADC region. That's the topic that I have been assigned. So let me just reiterate what my thinking is. First slide, please. The title of my presentation is Next. Transforming education in Southern Africa, the central role of teachers. No? Everybody's talking, next slide. Everybody's talking about transforming education, but I would like to put into focus the role of teachers, as we are all you are all teacher educators here. As mentioned by Patience, I used to be a teacher myself in the university, and even that before I was also helping train different women's organizations, their leaders, on different types of education. So here I would like to focus on the role of teachers. Next slide, please. And of course, this is one of the most famous sayings in this region. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And these are, I think, and for now, I think this is the mantra in Southern Africa, because we have such powerful person like Mandela. And of course, I'm always conscious to have a woman beside, and not only beside, because we know that women are the educators themselves. Next slide, please. But we also know, because we are covering Tanzania today, I hope all of you are familiar with your own Mwalimu, Julius Nyerere, who has a very important perspective on education. Education is not a way to escape poverty. That's what we are told. Now go get an education and you will get out of poverty. But it is, in fact, for Julius Nyerere, it is a way of fighting it. And that's very important to remember. Next slide. And then, of course, we're familiar. I think some of you are familiar when he said, we must run while they walk. No, when he was talking about the liberation and what Africa should be doing. And this inspired, I think, I hope many of you know Tandika Makandawire. He's from Zimbabwe, but he literally grew up in Malawi. And of course, we know before the relationship of some Zimbabwe and Malawi. And he has a very fascinating paper, which I hope you get to read, Running While Others Walk, Knowledge and Challenge of Africa's Development. And I'm trying to see here, what did Nyerere mean when he say we should walk, we should run while others are walking, because we need to catch up. And so this idea of catching up entails, according to Makandawire, learning not only about ideas from abroad, but also about one's capacities and weaknesses. Catching up requires that countries know themselves and their own history that has set the initial conditions for any future progress. And this next line is very important. They need a deep understanding of culture. Unfortunately, I hope that you can see, I tried to highlight in my own way. And what is he saying? What does it mean to catch up? It means not to copy what the colonizers have done, but finding more efficacious and morally acceptable ways of improving the life chances of millions. And I think it's important, even if he's an economist, he has devoted a lot of work on knowledge and education. And it means, he says, and finally, I would also argue that this broader development agenda will call for much broader systems of education and knowledge than as suggested in the simple. Most of our development plans here in Southern Africa talk about developing human capital. And he said, it's more than that. And even, of course, we know that in the 90s, the mantra was education for all. But he says, genuine education should go beyond that. And I think it's very important to reflect on these statements by critical thinkers in Malawi, Tanzania, and Southern Africa. And I think since I just added this in his article, in 2011, when he delivered this professorial lecture in the UK, he says, and this is very important, adding to the urgency are the dire consequences of climate change predicted for Africa. Africa will suffer most from climate change, not only because its climate will be the worst affected, but because its underdevelopment will leave no room for coping. The avoidance of virtually every predicted disaster we see now every day, the floods in the States, the fires all over the world, we are seeing this ourselves. But what's the difference if we listen to Makandawire? The difference is that the avoidance of virtually every predicted disaster will require high levels of technological and social capability on behalf of the continent. So he says the continent needs to embark on massive programs of enhancing human capabilities, mobilizing its individual and collective wisdom, improving its infrastructure and managing its water and energy resources. All this requires significant economic development. So we see where we are, and I just have this slide to show you, to remind you that for the SADC, the development model is to have the SADC industrialization strategy roadmap, which started 6 years ago and is saying that that's the goal for SADC. We need to industrialize. Next slide, please. But meantime, we have all
Sorry, Caroline, sorry to
yes?
disturb. Could we please ask you to switch to presentation mode? If Prince can put it on presentation mode, just that we need, yeah.
Sorry, Prince. Is it better now?
We still don't see anything.
We are yet to see the slide.
Is it better now?
The slide is yet to be visible.
I think Prince might be restarting.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, Carol, it's just that some people are viewing them on the phone, so they're saying that it's very small.
Okay, sorry. I
Sorry.
thought I was, we tested that and I thought it was already screen shared.
Okay, it's right now, yeah. Okay.
Good, thank you very much. So let's see now. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, we had the SADC industrialization strategy. Next slide. And next slide, can you press? And so in fact, these are pictures of what are our schools like, no? Press. And so what do we see? We see, and as teacher educators, you know what it is in schools, overcrowded. You have all these teachers teaching in different conditions. But of course, next please, you also have privileged situations where some children have computers. So in fact, we have in a situation where we have so much inequality in African societies, and this is reflected in the schools. Next slide, please. And we see this now. Everybody's saying for Southern Africa, we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And in fact, the challenge is, yes, there are some places where it's possible. Even now, as the teacher educators, each of you will have different access to devices or computers, or me, I'm in our conference hall. Next slide. Next slide. And in fact, the question is, what are we really learning? Next slide. If this is the environment for learning. And as I said, what's important is to remind ourselves that the inequality in societies is reflected in the educational system. In the schools, we know, for example, that rural schools, teachers in the rural areas have entirely different conditions than teachers in the urban areas. Next slide. So in fact, that is the background of where the teachers and the education is in Africa. But let me zoom out and say, what is the global situation like vis-a-vis development? So in 2015, almost all the heads of the states agreed that we should have the 2030 agenda of the SDG goals, which I hope most of you are familiar. Next slide. And in fact, central to this SDG agenda is SDG 4 as a global platform. We say that without SDG 4, the other 16 SDG goals will not be possible. So the SDG goal 4 says ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And it's important to understand that this is the global platform. And for the first time, there is mention in the global platform of increased supply of qualified teachers. Next slide, please. Now, meantime, I hope most of you are familiar with the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, where in contrast to the SDG targets of 7+3, we have 12 strategic objectives. And what is important to highlight is that in the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, the number one objective is to revitalize the teaching profession. This is in contrast to the global platform, which considers teachers as a means of implementation. Next slide, please. So in fact, we are living in a global and then also in an African continent. And of course, it would be good for us to understand as African teachers, as you are African teachers, the CESA aspires to create a new Africa citizen. And again, it's important to underline, what does citizenship mean in Africa, where in many countries, in many member states, you have ethnic groups, people who are still fighting. So what does it mean to be a citizen of Africa? But it says to create a new African citizen who will be an effective change agent for the continent's sustainable development, and a qualitative system of education and training to provide the African continent with efficient human resources, reorient Africa's education and training systems to meet the knowledge and competencies. Next slide, please. And I just want us, because my focus is on teachers, Target 4.C says that by 2030, substantially increase the supply of qualified teachers, including through international cooperation. Next slide, please. And so, as I said, it is very important to remember that for CESA, the number one strategic objective, and I would like to read it, the revitalization of the teaching profession to ensure quality and relevance at all levels of education, all, not the secondary, not the primary, but at all levels. Next slide, please. But of course, we need to remember that the SADC itself, SADC has a protocol on education and training even as early as 1997. There's so many provisions on teachers, how to compare and harmonize teacher education systems, how to establish equivalencies and harmonization of teacher certification, joint development of continuing teacher education. So SADC is very much into teachers as early as 1997. Next slide, please. Next slide, next slide. But as we can see, these are the figures. Unfortunately, we have not so clear figures, but I just wanted to get this information to you that in 2009, the Global Education Monitoring Report indicates, even if we say teachers are important, 85%, and we're just talking of primary teachers globally, were trained in 2017, but only 64% in sub-Saharan Africa. And many countries struggle to maintain standards while recruiting at high rates. Next slide, please. But given this is the situation of the teachers, and supposedly teachers are the core of learning. What does the World Bank say? The World Bank indicates that we are faced, in 2019, we are faced with a learning crisis. But what does learning crisis mean? Next slide, please. And for the World Bank, what's important is that they say there is a global crisis facing lives of millions of children. Please, next slide. And what are they saying? This is related to the learning in reading or math. So for the World Bank, the learning crisis is related to the low proficiency, next slide, in reading and math. No? So what we're focusing in terms of the learning crisis for the World Bank is just reading proficiency and math. Next slide, please. But in fact, people are saying the crisis is that being in school is not the same as learning, because in fact, what are the children learning in school? Next slide, please. And we know, side by side with the COVID pandemic and the corruption and all these power struggles, there's more and more evidence of gender-based violence. So is gender-based violence an indication of the learning crisis? Next slide, please. In 1972, UNESCO came out with a FOR report, which says about the importance of learning to be. What does it mean to learn? It means to be oneself. And in fact, this is not new in Africa. While FOR report came up with this in 1972, in Africa, Ubuntu is a very important principle, especially in Southern Africa. A person is a person through other persons. I am because you are. And this is what we learn in the houses, in communities, in the schools. Next slide, please. And in 1994, the second learning to learning document, I would say, is the law report, which talks about the treasure within, that we need to learn not only to be, but we need to learn to know, we need to learn to do, and we need to learn to live together. And so, in fact, if one is asking, what should the students learn? What should the teachers need to teach? What should they themselves learn? This is an important framework of how to learn. And now, more recently, UNESCO is developing the third, I would call, lifelong learning policy document. It's called Learning to Become. So one can ask, what is the difference between learning to be and learning to become? And this is the 21st century policy document of UNESCO. Next slide, please. So, and because we have also decided that TVET is an important area, I call this the Cinderella of the education sector, where not so much resources and policies are concerned, but UNESCO has emphasized that when we look at TVET, we need to talk about access, we need to talk about greening, and we need to talk about productivity. Next slide, please. So obviously, next slide. Next slide. The SDG and education is very relevant in Southern Africa. And our challenge, as I mentioned in my slide, is how do we transform education? There's so many of our thinkers, our leaders of liberation movements, anti-apartheid, who already mentioned this. But where are we in Africa? Next slide, please. And this is showing what it means to have quality education. There's so many aspects. Next slide. But here in the UNESCO Regional Office, we have prioritized teachers. Teachers are central to quality learning education. So without the teachers, there's nothing as quality education. So we need to invest in the learning and training of teachers. So in the last 5-6 years, we've tried to see how do we make sure that there is a facilitative learning environment for teacher, policy environment for teachers to really be professionals. So we're happy that in 2018, the ministers of SADC approved the SADC the SADC Regional Standards and Competencies Framework. Next slide, please. And it mentions in this regional framework, it has elements to say that teachers, as part of the standards of teachers, they need to have professional knowledge and understanding. They need to have skills. They need to have professional values and partnerships. Next slide, please. And we're very proud that last June, in the recently held ministerial SADC meeting of education, the regional framework for CPD, continuous professional development, was approved. And it's important to recognize the importance of this framework as it helps. This regional framework, it's not imposing to countries, but it's a reference document so that countries are able to benchmark their own programs, policies on CPD. And hopefully it's able to promote collaboration and strengthen communities of practice. Next slide, please. So in fact, we want to, with this, we hope that we are able to really support teachers by having regional standards, as well as accompanying these standards are continuous professional development. So this was where we were. In 2019, 2020, we were trying to support this. And this is what happened in 2020. I hope you're seeing that how COVID has unequally also impacted on the region. And this is a timeline. So you've seen South Africa has been constant, but Eswatini, I put this slide up because in the beginning, Eswatini was very low. But we can see that Eswatini is one of the hardest hit. And this is daily newly confirmed COVID cases per million. So this is not incidence, but it's according to the population. And we've seen Malawi is quite low. And of course, we know the story in Tanzania. So Tanzania is really a flat story. But this is the context. And I think, next slide, what we try to see is what is the government doing with COVID-19. And in May, June, we undertook together with the SADC a series of researches. And this is what the government said. This is what their educational response was. And there's development of online materials and platform, development of alternative online, but only 7% of the government said, only 7% said that they were training teachers. Next slide, please. And in terms of what kind of support, they were saying Zoom, organizing trainers, and online educational resources, and in addition, infrastructure and technical support. So this is the kind of support the teachers got. Next slide, please. And if we ask, when we asked the governments, what were the implementation challenges across member states vis-a-vis COVID? We see these are the top responses. There's no mention of teachers as an implementation challenge. Next slide, please. And so we did a lot of studies, and as we are focusing on teachers, we had also done a study, and Heila was one of those team leaders who did a study on ESD. There was a study done on teacher readiness on remote teaching during COVID-19. And indeed, what was clear was that the closures created teaching. Everybody's talking about non-continuity of learning, but nobody's talking about creating the challenge of the teaching crisis. And so in fact, the question of how the teachers are ready to do emergency remote teaching. Next slide, please. So it's obvious that these were the challenges found in the study. Teachers were not prepared at all for emergency remote training. They had limited access to infrastructure. There was limited interaction between teachers and learners. And I think this is very important, inadequate psychosocial support for both teachers and learners, poor motivation for teachers. Next slide. And on the other hand, the teacher said it was an important time because it provided a huge learning curve to change and adapt. Even as they were hampered by limited access to electricity, teachers still managed to be creative and resilient and try to adapt. Next slide, please. So this slide tries to show the different elements that need to be done just for one skill, Teacher readiness for emergency response training. We're not talking about ESD, global citizenship. We're just talking about how teachers should be ready for emergency remote teaching. They need to have access to technology infrastructure. They need to have access to knowledge and training in ERT. They need to have access to instructional content. They need to have environmental readiness, and they need to have access to psychosocial support to ERT. So you can see it's a very complex environment that needs to be enabled so that teachers are really able to participate in emergency remote training. And now this is more important. We see that we are now in the third wave. And I've read somewhere that for South Africa, they believe in their modelings, their end of the third wave will be the end of August, but they are envisioning that the start of the fourth wave will be, or the peak of the fourth wave will be in December. So what does this mean? Are the teachers again prepared? Next slide, please. So we did another study to show what exactly are the competencies in primary and secondary teachers. And we are just talking about ICT competencies, not even emergency remote teaching. Next slide, please. And what did we find out? In terms of training, only 28%, and this is in Zambia, learned about ICT when they were studying in the university. And if you see how they learned it, most of them learned it while, if I say most, you can see where they're learning it in school-based CPD, and 39.5 is through personal efforts, through workshops and short-term courses. Next slide. But those are the challenges. But as I said, we have a wealth of experiences. We have, after all, Southern Africa is the home of the most liberation movements in the region. So you have very really resilient teachers. So we have a lot of good practices where the paradigm shift of using emerging technologies in education, we have documented that, where people are focusing on trying to understand how best to design learning spaces, how to interact. Here in Zimbabwe, we are using WhatsApp to train teachers. Next slide, please. And in TVET, we are seeing also that we are happy, even if many TVET colleges are not equipped with ICT, because the thinking perhaps is that they don't need computers. We're seeing that more and more in Malawi with our STEP project. We have been able to equip 13 colleges, TVET colleges with ICT equipment so that they are at least in the state of the art of education and learning with ICT. Next slide, please. So we have a situation where we really are in a region with so much resources, human, we have the youngest population as well as minerals, the thinking capacity, the visioning. And I would like to end with 3 slides, again with Nelson Mandela. Action without vision is only passion, passing time. And where so many people are just acting, vision without action is merely daydreaming. But vision with action can change the world. Previous slide, sorry. And just let me end, another slide, by what Julius Nyerere has said. And I think it's important for us to be reminded that the purpose of education, when I said we need to transform education, I think it's important to keep this in mind as part of the transformation process. The purpose of education is liberation of people from restraints and limitations of ignorance and dependency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Sorry, I was trying to find my buttons here. Thank you so much for those very insightful words and setting the pace for our course. I will not attempt to summarize because it's really loaded. You have shown us what the challenges are, how core teachers are in this bid to ensure that we get it right in the pursuit of the 4th industrial revolution that we are thinking about for the Southern Africa, and that without quality education, professional development for our teachers, and linked with the aspiration of Africa in our CESA, we will not be doing justice to education in the southern part of Africa. And so to move quickly to the next presenter, so that we will be able to perhaps find time at the end for questions and maybe comments from the audience. Let me move on to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is a distinguished professor, Professor Heila Lotz-Sisitka, who started her professional career also as a grade 1 teacher. She now holds a Tier 1 South African National Research Foundation Department of Science and Technology Chair in Global Change and Social Learning Systems, in a distinguished research professor, and she's a distinguished research professor at the Rhodes University. Her chair is based on the Environmental Learning Research Center at the Rhodes University in South Africa, which she directed for 15 years, that is between the year 2000 and 2015. Currently, her focus is on research on transformative social learning and green skills or green skills learning pathways in biodiversity, the water-food nexus, climate change, social and environmental justice, and just sustainability transitions. She has served in over 20 national and international research and policy programs and scientific committees focusing on education, transformative learning, and sustainability, and is regularly invited to present keynote contributions in these areas. To date, she has done about 85 keynotes in 44 countries around the world. She has led various national and international research programs and has supervised 62 masters and 42 PhDs and 12 postdoctoral scholars and has examined 20 PhD internationally. I believe that these statistics would have improved, by now, and she will tell us more about it. Her publications number over 170, and she has been the recipient of a number of awards, including the Vice Chancellor's Teaching Award, the Vice Chancellor's Community Engagement Award twice, and the Vice Chancellor's Senior Research Award, being one of the 2 academics in the university to have obtained the honor of receiving all 3 awards. Her passion is sustainability and social justice, education, emancipatory agency, and people's participation in transformative education and learning processes. Without further ado, let me invite the distinguished Professor Heila to make her presentation on education for sustainability, education for sustainable development in Southern Africa. What is it in the past, the present, and the future? Please, Professor Heila, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Patience. I sent you a very short CV to read. I see you found the long one.
We need to know more about you because this is a new course and we're having people from Tanzania who are not necessarily in our region that may need to know more about you. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Patience, and good morning, everybody. It's a very big pleasure for me to be here again, and of course to be part of this initiative, which I have a very big passion for. I think Patience mentioned that I was a grade 1 teacher, and I have a very big passion for teachers. I feel like they are some of the most important people in our societies, and they so often don't get recognized as being such important people in our societies. So I'm going to share with you just some background this morning on ESD, where it's been coming from in the SADC region, where we are now, and what we might be doing together as we go forward. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. I think that's working. And then I just need to get rid of all of these other things so that I can concentrate on presenting. So Previn, I think if there's any need to stop, please just stop me because I'm going to take away all visible meeting, floating control panels and other interruptions.
We'll do so, Prof.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, so here we are on the second day of this, our 2021 Sustainability Starts with Teachers webinar series. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, the webinar series is a complement to the online course. So the online course goes on over time, and the webinar series is really just to bring us together, to draw our attention to some of these important things and to give us further background. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of history, ESD in the past, the present, and future in Southern Africa. And Southern Africa is our home. It's the one we have. So it's the one we live in, and it's the one we all need to work together to look after. We are working together on the SST program, on this 5-step action learning program framework that I did introduce the other day, and that you will also find on the online course platform. You'll find it in the course materials, and you'll also find it on the course website. So we are really here at the beginning, trying to looking back into our contexts, policies, and what's happening, and what kind of teachers we want for going forward into this next century, as Carolyn has so beautifully also shown us the background to that, and the aspiration and the importance of giving attention to that. And in this program, we're working together on a change project in each of the institutions, so that our teacher educators can work together to advance change in their contexts for the future and the future teachers that they are working with. And of course, similarly in our ECD and TVET teacher education groups. So the first part of our change project that we will be working together on is to develop a common understanding of sustainable development and education for sustainable development and what it means in our context. Because ESD is a process, it's education for sustainable development. It's a process that responds to, but also helps to proactively prevent sustainability challenges. So it's got that double job. It's both to respond to challenges, but also to prevent further challenges. So we need to try to avoid further water pollution, or we need to try to avoid further damages to our environment and our community resources and so on and so on. So it's very important that we develop a common understanding of sustainable development and education for sustainable development in our context. And that is actually one of the first tasks that all of you need to do together in your community of practice. You have to address this question: how will you go about supporting a common understanding of education for sustainable development in your teacher education institution, your TVET institution, and in your change projects community of practice? So it's very important to take time to come to understand this, what it is that we're talking about here in your own context. And one of the ways that we can do that is to understand that we all live together on this planet. And I loved this statement that Ban Ki-moon made when we were at the World ESD conference in Japan at the end of the UN decade on education for sustainable development. He said, you know, he welcomed us all there. He said, welcome to working together for a better future. And he said, there is no plan B because there is no planet B. So we have our planet. We have to, it's the place where we all live and work, and where we all live and work and teach. And unfortunately, it is a planet that is under pressure. It's under pressure from climate change. It's under pressure from overexploitation. And that puts pressure on the planet's people. So somehow, as a human community, we need to be doing work together across the planet to, you know, reverse that situation and to create a better future for ourselves and for the next generations. And it helps us to know that, you know, there is no plan B because there is no planet B, which means that all of us on planet A, which is the only one that we have, need to find ways of working together wherever we are. And it doesn't matter where you are. It could be in the rural area here in the Eastern Cape, as this one picture is, or it can be, you know, up in Kenya, or it can be in Mozambique, it can be in Tanzania, it can be in Eswatini, it can be anywhere, it can be in Canada, it can be in the United States of America. Wherever we are, we need to be working together to take care of this planet, because it is the only one that we have. That is the big history of ESD. That's why we have ESD, because we've had to come together as a human community and begin to think about, well, how do we go forward if we are putting our planet under so much pressure? We've seen in the last year, you know, with the COVID-19 crisis, in a way, we've seen what I would call a sort of, I think Carolyn also referred to it, it's sort of like intensified nature of the kinds of issues and crises that we're dealing with. So we've had the health pandemic, which is COVID-19, but that has got a longer term, you know, challenge going on behind it, which is climate change. And we have the Conference of the Parties going on, I think, very soon, trying to look again at the world's commitment to address climate change, because climate change is being seen really as the long-term. It's a long-term issue, and it's one that we have to tackle because it is having huge consequences all over the world, as Carolyn also mentioned just now. In Southern Africa, climate change and water resources are very, very closely related, especially in the countries which are more dry land, like Namibia, ourselves, Botswana. But many of our countries are going to be having challenges around that. There's also the challenges of floods and cyclones. We've seen them coming in the last few years. And we also see these things coming together in very ordinary things, such as, you know, food crisis. The little map here in the middle, the one on the side here is the COVID-19 cases by country, and this little map in the middle is the food crisis in Africa over the last year and year and a half. So these are the things that we deal with. They're things we deal with on an everyday basis. And so we have to come together and think about the role of education and what should education be doing. It can't just be sitting in the background and teaching, you know, material that is really out of date and that is not really relevant to the present or the future. So this is our challenge as educators. This is a picture from the COVID-19 just here in South Africa, where we had, you know, these massive food crisis soon after the pandemic broke, which just shows that the systems that we are sitting in are not very strong. So we need new generations of young people who can build better systems that are not going to create these kinds of challenges for us. Water challenges, food challenges, and so on. So ESD, in its long history, it's got a long history, so it's not a new thing that we're dealing with here, has been very much linked to the history and the definition of sustainable development. In 1972 was the first time when it was actually the first largest gathering of global governments, heads of state, who gathered together to begin to discuss this issue of the planet under pressure at the UN Conference on Environment and Development, which was held in Stockholm. And at that conference, there was a realization that something needed to be done. Very shortly after that, we had the Tbilisi principles of environmental education, which started to introduce the need for integrated approaches and dealing with environment and development together. We then had the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, and that gave rise to Agenda 21, of which Chapter 36 is the education chapter. You can see here all the education activity emerging as the sustainable development activity emerges. In 2002, we had the Johannesburg World Summit on Sustainable Development. All of these being some of the biggest gatherings of world leaders. Now, what is it that brings the world leaders together in such numbers? It is actually a concern for the planetary system and the health of our planetary system, and the need for us to work together across boundaries and across borders. So we had then in 2012 the Rio +20 Summit, which had a strong focus on green economy. And in 2015, we had the proclamation of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which we will work a lot with in this particular program. So alongside that, we had, as I said, Chapter 36 of Agenda 21, which came in 1992. Before that, we had the Tbilisi Principles of Environmental Education. We had the UN Decade on Education for Sustainable Development in 2015, coming out of the 2005, sorry, coming out of the Johannesburg Summit. We had a number of SADC REAP and ESD policies in the Southern African region emerging out of that process. I'll share with you some of that. And most recently, we've had the ESD Global Action Program, which has now transformed itself into the ESD 2030 agenda that Professor Hubert also mentioned yesterday when he was doing the opening of our session. So in short, sustainable development is development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's the most well-known definition of sustainable development, and it's the one that's very widely used. But there are so many definitions, different definitions of sustainable development. In fact, there's like 300 or more. So this is not an uncontested concept, and it needs to get meaning in its local context. So that's why we are encouraging all of you to develop change projects and to develop a common understanding of sustainable development in your context, because it must get meaning in context. It's no point just talking about a definition at this very broad level if it's not connected into the contexts of practice. So we do encourage, you know, the change project and the work in the context, and to define sustainable development in your particular context around the places and spaces and people that you're working with. So environmental education and ESD, sometimes we talk about them together. Sometimes we talk about them as evolving. Sometimes we talk about them as more or less the same thing. But in fact, in Southern Africa, they've been very closely related. They haven't been very separate. There's been a strong relationship between these two concepts right from the beginning, which I'll also share with you. So environmental education and ESD has been on the move, if I could call it that, in Southern Africa since before 1992. And I'll share that history with you in a minute. Here you can see all these big global gatherings, and over time, the development of partnerships, projects, programs, all the way through with the SADC Secretariat, with UNESCO, and UNESCO ROSA, the UNESCO Regional Office for Southern Africa, being the focal point now for ESD in Africa. And we're very privileged to have Patience chairing our sessions today. And it's actually her portfolio is to hold ESD for the whole of Africa. So the Regional Office for Southern Africa is holding ESD to share and work with colleagues from across the continent. So it's very exciting process. And we have a strong history that we're bringing into this. And this year, I think Patience, she mentioned it briefly yesterday, I think, is that we're going to be launching, or she's going to be launching these country level workshops for ESD, and the SST program is very much part of that. So a very dynamic, active space that we're all part of. And it's got a long history. So I wanted to introduce you to a little bit of this history. But environment and sustainability education has been a field of practice in transition, if I could call it that, for many years now in our region. And initially, right back in 1982, we established the Environmental Education Association of Southern Africa, which was established right in the northern parts of Namibia in the days of the liberation struggle, when people were seeing that actually part of our liberation is not just, fighting politics, but in fact looking after our resources, our rivers, our land, and that part of the liberation is going to be able to work our land and to be able to, have adequate access to water and other natural resources. So it was a very interesting component of the liberation movement, bringing the environment into this, the vision for transformation of the region, post-independent type of period. So ISA was established in 1982 as a regional association, the Environmental Education Association of Southern Africa. And it is a 39-year-old regional association that deals with EE and ESD with many partners. And its key partners are UNESCO, SADC, UNEP, UNICEF, many other partners. And I must say, I'm very proud that I've been an ISA member since 1991. When I started my studies in this field in 1991, I was so inspired by this regional vision and the commitment to education transformation that I decided to join this association, and have been working, in partnership with this association and all of these partners ever since then on this very important part of the future of Southern Africa, which is to create a sustainable world for the next generation, and of course education being so important in that process. So ISA is a very strong institution. It doesn't have a lot of money, but it has fantastic people who do a lot to build this association. Most often people in ISA, in fact, there is no money actually in ISA. We all work for free, and we hold this association together. I think because of that, it comes with the social commitment of the people in the region. So it was formed in 1982, and its logo is the baobab tree. And the baobab tree, as we all know, it's such a strong image in our countries. I know that Malawi has got some of the most beautiful baobab trees that I've ever seen. It's the African tree of life. And so that was the inspiration, was this idea of the African tree of life being the image for this educational work that we wanted to do. So it's an early peace building association formed across national borders, ahead of its time in vision and intent. And it is actually the second oldest association in the world that deals with environment and sustainability education. So we can see that people in Southern Africa, we're not sleeping. We were wide awake, long ahead of our time when this movement was being started by the early pioneers of the movement. It's been through lots of discussions, and one of the most important discussions I think we had was in the early 90s. This is more or less the time when I joined ISA, and it was a very interesting debate going on whether we should focus narrowly on the environment or whether we should consider the environment as part of economics, politics, and society. And this was a big debate at one of the ISA conferences in 1990. And this was sort of like a very interesting debate, actually, because people felt we can't only focus on the environment in isolation from economics, from politics, from society. So you can see in those early days, we were also building the foundations of some of the ESD thinking, which brings together economy, society, environment. And what we also included was politics, which seems to have disappeared a little bit over time in the environment, society, economy definition. And in early days in ISA, we had politics in there. And I think that we all know in Southern Africa, we need to keep politics also on the agenda, because that's so powerful in shaping what happens, our laws and policies, and so on. So we used this little model right in the early days, was developed in 1990, to develop a conceptual tool for ourselves to think about environment and sustainability education and what it involves. So it involves living things in life support systems, it involves jobs and money, it involves people living together, and it involves power, policy, and decisions. And that is what we do when we do ESD work. And we do it to try to build a better future. So that was one of the early debates, a very important and interesting debate, and of course one that has carried itself very strongly through all the way over these years. Second debate that was also very interesting was, it was a discussion about who teaches who and who knows what. And what was so interesting was that we felt in that early debate that, you know, not everybody knows everything about environmental issues. Therefore, and many of the environmental issues and societal issues and social issues that we're dealing with are contextual. And therefore, often the people who know a lot about them are the people who live in the places where these issues are found. And so we felt like we can't have, you know, educators that know everything that must come and transfer knowledge to people. Instead, we should be willing to learn and work with people as educators. And at that same time in 1992, there was the Rio Earth Summit, and there was an NGO forum, and in that NGO forum, they had a principle which said we are all learners and educators, and we need to co-learn our way into the future together. We can't have one group thinking they know more than another group. We all have to work out how to make these changes together over time. And so we decided in ISA then we would think about and we would use this idea of we are all learners and educators. And we also designed our courses with that as a key principle. And I think those of you who were in the courses in the early days, you would have walked into room 20 and found this statement up on the wall, we are all learners and educators. And we used to spend the first 2 days of our course discussing and learning from each other who was bringing what from what context, so that we could learn who was in the room and how we could move forward together. And then we encouraged people to go and do the same in their communities, go and learn from the communities. You know, what does the communities know, and what can we learn from them, and what can we bring to them from our more educational institutions where we have knowledge resources and we can share new knowledge with people. So this was very interesting. Second debate also carried through, and it was the foundation of many of the courses that we started running. In 1992, we started the ISA Goldfields courses and the SADC REAP courses shortly after that. And these transgressed the boundaries between formal and informal learning, theory and practice. And it was where the change project model was born. And in the early courses, we used to have teacher educators as well as NGO practitioners, many different people doing the courses together. And so we do encourage you to work in communities of practice around your teacher education institution, where you can also learn from the NGO groups, other educators in the communities, the wise elders, the parents, the youth movements. You know, we can all learn from each other as we try to deal with the challenges that we are faced with in our community. So this was a very important second debate. And it was one that I really loved, because I loved this model of education where we can think about each other as both learners and educators. And by 1995, we'd started working ISA, the SADC Regional Environmental Education Program, and the UNESCO Windhoek office. We started working together to proactively support regional boundary crossing to ensure that all SADC countries could benefit from regional capacity building. We started these, built on these participatory certificate courses, which were started in South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zanzibar in the early 90s, into the WWF International Certificate course, which then became the SADC International Certificate course, and then became the SADC Course Development Network. And that then developed courses in Eswatini, in those days it was Swaziland, Zambia, Lesotho, Namibia, and elsewhere. And that was this was the front runners of our Sustainability Starts with Teachers courses that we are working on now together again. By 2000, I think we could see very strong evidence of proactively crossing the boundary between theory and practice. And we really tried to center the ESD activities on practices in the schools, practices in the communities, practices in the colleges, practices in the universities, and really came to try to understand that sustainability is not a theoretical thing. Actually, it must be a practice that we can work on together in our institutions. So you can see here waste management practices by a group of young students. You can see these young learners are doing composting with a wormery. These young learners in these schools were building food gardens for the early childhood education setting and for the school, bringing in new innovative water harvesting approaches, and so on. So we were able then to use tools like auditing, situated active learning approaches, and center them around people's matters of concern. What were people concerned about? Energy, water, food, biodiversity, waste, etc., gender issues, etc. And they started to build these change projects around these concerns and issues that they were dealing. And when we started to see this work growing in the schools and communities, we thought, wow, you know, our children are actually leading the way. They're beginning to show us what can be done in our education institutions. And that was quite an inspiration in the community and in the ESA conference. By 2002, South Africa was hosting the World Summit on Sustainable Development, and that was such a fantastic opportunity for us. You can see there's President Thabo Mbeki and the former President Nelson Mandela opening that summit. We had some really fantastic young scholars involved in the summit. And we did, at that particular meeting, we had a UNESCO side event. It was a special UNESCO side event that was organized with the South African government and the regional SADC Regional Environmental Education Program. And what we did there was, it was our first effort to build an online course, use online course designs. And in those days, we still used the CD-ROMs. We made this online course with UNESCO. It was a program that UNESCO in Paris had done on education for sustainable futures. And we adapted it for Southern Africa. And it was the first time that we built a strong focus on indigenous knowledge into the ESD materials that we were working on in our courses, and to bring that then into teacher education. And that CD-ROM was then shared quite widely and also quite well used at the time. By 2010, we'd continued to work during the UN decade, especially with the UNESCO and UNEP and the United Nations University as a sort of partnership initiative. I think, Saba, I noticed you were on the platform, but we visited that campus there in Nairobi very often, and the previous director of the ESD unit in Paris joined us quite a few times there. So did the people from the United Nations University who were setting up the regional centers of expertise at the time. And we were running the MESA program, and we will continue to work with teachers and teacher educators through the MESA chairs in Eswatini, the University of Swaziland, very, very strong University of Botswana, University of Zambia, and others. And this network then built, it was African Regional Centers of Expertise in ESD network. And it was built on partnerships between UNESCO, UNU, and UNEP. And what was very interesting about this network of institutions, you can see a picture of them here. Here's Professor Ghulam Mohammedabai, who was at that time the head of the African Association of Universities. We were gathering there in the Nairobi campus. And what this network decided to focus on was African heritage knowledge in the context of social innovation. So what they were doing was to try to document and bring to the fore our cultural and heritage knowledge and how that can catalyze social innovation in ESD. I think Charles was very much involved also in some of this work with Sol Shava, Clayton Zazu, and others, and building the strength of indigenous knowledge, heritage knowledge, cultural knowledge, and bringing it together with modern scientific knowledge. And I'm mentioning this because in our program, I think it's next week or the week after, I think the 2nd of September, I think, we will be joining this RCE network for their conference. So we're going to bring the SST group together with this African Regional Centers of Expertise networks. Very exciting, and we'll be hearing from them. So I just wanted to mention this specifically to you this morning as also part of this bigger network of people and groups and institutions that we've been working with over the years. By 2012, there was a very strong need to start to bring ESD into the economy, because people realized that unless we transform the economy, we're not actually going to get a more sustainable society. So Carolyn mentioned the importance of industrialization, but we need industrialization that is not going to produce more pollution problems for us. So we have to think differently about industrialization. We have to think about closed system, green economy, circular economy, alternatives and options as we do industrialization. This is a beautiful picture, I think, from Nadit in Namibia, where they've been working with solar energy as options and so on. And this is a very difficult type of boundary crossing to do. It's very difficult to shift the old style modernist neoliberal kind of end of pipe pollution type of industrialization to more critical forms of green transformative economies. And then we have to develop the kinds of green skills, the green skills research, and we need new kinds of TVET, technical and vocational education practice. And, you know, the UNESCO Harare office has been trying to lead on green skills, green TVET. And so we really are welcoming the TVET colleagues into this program to help with this process. This is some of the early work that was coming through in SADC, also with the UNESCO office, trying to bring a greening of TVET. You can see in the year 2013, we attended a session at the UNESCO Paris office, and this was the first deliberations there on green TVET. And you can see there we were doing this, closing the circle, what ESD brings to TVET: sustainable design, renewable materials, eco-efficient, reuse, zero waste. So if our education can, you know, help to close the circle, that's the kind of thing we want to try to do. And at that time, there were some very interesting change projects going on in Botswana and elsewhere in some of the TVET colleges where they were trying to reduce impact. You can see here they're trying to deal with the problem of disposal of oil, which was producing pollution in the soil. And that, of course, affects the capacity for food production. So we must find better solutions. We can't just put oil pollution into the soil, you see. So our TVET college lecturers were being very innovative and trying to find a better used oil disposal practice with their students in that context. So these things have been going. We've got plenty to learn from. And lots to draw on as we do our work together here. By 2015, Southern African ESD engaged approaches, such as the ones I'm showing you, were recognized and represented at the World Conference on ESD in Japan. And if you had your binoculars here, you could see some of us here on the stage at that World ESD Conference. There was a big contingent from SADC there. You can see some of them here in the different sessions. Our ministers were all there. Our system leaders were all there. The programs were there. The work was represented. I think Idem Adubra, Carolyn was, you know, leading us to really represent SADC very well at that conference at that time. So it was really fantastic to see the Southern African work there and also see it being recognized as some of the best in the world, or some of amongst the best ESD work in the world. So we have a very strong tradition to build on and to draw on as we work forward. By 2015, we were so excited because finally we'd been able to get recognition that ESD is an integral part of quality education. And that's what Target 4.7 does in Goal 4. It says that if we want quality education, we must include education for sustainable development, global citizenship education, and we must include a stronger appreciation of cultural diversity and culture's contribution to sustainable development. That's integral to quality education. It's not on the side. It's not outside of the education system. It's right in the middle of it. And all we have to do is make it work as educators. So this is very significant. And this entire Sustainability Starts with Teachers course is designed to help us to do this work together. By 2019, we were very grateful that together with the UNESCO ROSA office, with Carolyn and patients and others, we were able to mobilize funding from SIDA for this SST program. At the same time, we were lucky also in South Africa to mobilize additional funding there for the Fundisa for Change program, and to build connections between all of these programs and to build on the histories of the international training programs, the national environmental education programs in Namibia, Swaziland, the scene that was in Namibia, the Lesotho environmental education program, and all of the history of the work that had been done. And it wasn't surprising, therefore, that after 2015, 3, I think, Southern African projects have won UNESCO ESD prizes in these global awards. The one was the Nadit in Namibia, and there have been a couple of others. We'll show you the video in one of the mornings that we can. So you can see that the Southern African community are on point. We're ready, we're going, we know what we're doing, and we're really just trying to build more and more strength by cooperating with each other as we go forward. We've also been doing academic work in this field for quite a long time. We've had our research chair, we've had master's, PhD programs, a number of research chairs in the SADC countries, also master's and PhD programs in those countries, like in Zambia, I think Lesotho, many others. Eswatini's got some. And we've been very excited to see that the journal, our journal, the Southern African Journal, which carries the academic work of this field, we were completely blown away that we found that just a couple of years ago in 2019, we found that we'd had 55,000 downloads of our journal articles in 86 countries across the world. That was amazing to us. And this continues, by the way, to this day. So we also invite all of you being in higher education institutions to capture your change projects, to collaborate, and to also publish them. You could publish them in this journal as well. And it's a journal that carries a lot of information about Indigenous knowledge, culture, ESD practices, and so on. It is available for free, open source online, and we can also share the link with you. We also then were able to create the first e-learning library with all the SADC materials that we collected. We collected them especially for this program, and I mentioned them yesterday. They're on the website. The first time we did it, we put them on this flash stick, but since then we've been able to put them on the website, so they're completely free. And by 2019, we were able to launch this new, fantastic new SST course, which all of you are on now. By 2020, we took the course online. Here's the program from last year's opening. You can see we had also a very exciting opening last year with our governments and the VC and UNESCO. And this is our second year of taking the course online. And this year we're trying to go to scale and we've got more than 270 participants. So last year we were just managed to get the course going online. Under the COVID-19 pressures, this year we want to try to go to scale, and we want all of you to be part of this and to do the online course as time goes on. We'll be providing a lot of support for that as we go along. And while we've made so much progress. The truth is that we still have these challenges. This is where I live. In the 2019 course, we took the participants to this dam that was completely empty. And in our town, the dams are still dry. We have still water shortages. We have water on, water off, water on, water off, water on, water off. Literally every day we have water on, the next day it's off. On for some, off, on for some, off. We have a major water crisis here, but we have the implications of climate change, you know, affecting literally all of our countries in different ways. So even though we've made all of this progress, and I think we are thankful that we have, because we've got so much more capacity to deal with the challenges that we still have, we still need to use our skills and our agency and our knowledge and our partnerships and our willingness to work together to continue to try to work out how to, what my students say, it's a hot mess, get out of the hot mess. And so all over we see, even though we've made progress, the waste is still piling up, the world is still heating up, we're facing water scarcity, our biodiversity is still being lost, people are still heavily affected by poverty. So it is a serious issue, it's not going away quickly. But also, after all these years, the 39 years, we have the SDGs, which we didn't have before, and we are much more capable of boundary crossing, expansive learning, and working together for change. So this is what we need to mobilize as we go forward. And our story shows that we need to continue our tradition of boundary crossing work, and because we still have some big boundaries to cross. We need to renew the commitment to integration of theory and practice, active learning, engaged research and practices. We need to revitalize and build new partnerships all over the place at every local level with government, civil society, other actors, teacher education institutions, municipalities, because it's only through partnerships that we are actually going to be able to really mobilize the kind of knowledge and skill that we need to move forward. And I mentioned yesterday, I think, that by 2055, our continent is going to be home to half of the world's young people. So we do need to reimagine education in Africa, which I think is what Carol was also trying to encourage us to do. Let's think laterally, let's think innovatively, let's think beyond the current constraints. How are we going to offer an interesting, exciting education to all of these young people as we go forward? So we must continue to amplify transformative learning and agency for change in the way that we contextualize SDGs, and we must continue to build partnerships in all of our contexts. Here are some youngsters in Zambia at the Copperbelt University, working with the teacher education college there. You can see these youngsters trying to deal with the waste management challenges in their community. You can see here a group of teacher educators trying to deal with climate smart agriculture technologies and trying to implement them. So wherever we go across our region, there are things we can do, and people are doing things. So that's the exciting thing. All we need to do is continue to do things and to link up with others. And that's what we want to try to encourage also through this program, is that ongoing work, linking, of course, to our broader policies. We must prioritize boundary crossing green skills for green societies, green work and green learning, because we can't build an industrialization complex in Africa that simply leaves us with the world's pollution. We can't absorb the world's pollution, as they don't want the pollution on their continents. We have to put our foot forward and say we want green economies, green jobs, green skills, green work and learning. We don't want industries that are just going to leave us with polluted environments. So let's step up, let's get our thinking together, let's develop green skills capacity, and let's move forward with a new paradigm if we can. So we're working hard on this, the green skills area. You can see here's a study that was done on banking for a sustainable economy, asking the banks to invest more carefully. Public supply chain management. This is us visiting a renewable energy plant, looking at the technologies there and looking at how they're building skills for young people coming through that plant, learning the new technologies. So these are important things. We need to think more carefully about the problems that we have around us, not be superficial. create better alternatives. And we need to continue to prioritize boundary crossing with teachers and educators. I think Carolyn really emphasized again how vitally important it is to continue to work with and expand our work with our teachers. Teachers, I mentioned when I started, for me are some of the most important people in our community. So we all together doing that work. They work with all of these young people and with each other and with us. So we need to also engage deeply with the SDGs as we go forward. There's beautiful websites that carry the information about the SDGs. We'll share them with you as we go forward. We need to think about these SDGs in terms of building back better, in terms of just recovery from the COVID pandemic. We need to do, interesting work there. And most importantly is that we need to bring our local knowledge, cultures, metaphors, and approaches to ESD in SADC. And I absolutely loved this work from Lesotho, where they started their whole ESD teacher education program around the metaphor of Lehai Larona, which is our home, the earth, our home. And that allowed all of them to sit around the table and to think about how to approach their ESD project by just using a local metaphor, local language, local metaphor, and the living heritage that exists in the communities. So we encourage you strongly to do that. I think Charles will also be showing you many examples of that. We need to focus on how ESD can enhance educational quality. Of course, sustainable development can improve the quality of education, but quality education is needed for sustainable development. So it's a two-way process here, you see. We're not going to get climate action without quality education, and we're not going to get quality education without a focus on climate action. You see, it's that double-sided story all the way through. So we need to do this thinking, what role for education in sustainable development. We'll be doing that together with you to strengthen the future of young people in our country. We've published a book on schooling for sustainable development in Africa. We can share that with you as well as we go along, and so on. And then to really give meaning to this target 4.7 and not just see it as a technical target, but as a systemic and emancipatory and transformation target. And I'm very excited to see that UNESCO also is talking much more about this target as the transformative transformation target. So we can give life to that. And then we'll also be working together to realize the ESD for 2030. And I think Patience will give us more insight into this as we go along. But you can see here that it's a new document. We'll also share it with you, and we'll put it on the online course platform so that you can access it there. And I'll also ask Previn and Maleche if we can put it onto the website so that you can also access it there. It's a very important document for us to be working with. It's a lovely document. It's beautifully written, and it gives such good guidance on ESD and what ESD is and how to work with ESD. So it says here we need, societal transformation, learning outcomes, learning content, pedagogy, and the learning environment, all of those things to transform and to transform each other. And we have some very good materials from UNESCO that we can work with. Here's the Learning Objectives booklet, which is already on the website. And again, we'll share it with you. And it encourages us to give attention to cognitive, social, emotional, as well as action engagement type of learning objectives. And we'll cover that as we go through the course as well. This is a new study that was released at the World ESD Conference not long ago. I can't remember when it was. Patience would be able to remind me. It was very recently, earlier this year, I think. And this study is a very interesting study because it looked at how our countries are dealing with environmental and sustainability issues in the curriculums. And we found quite a lot of weakness in terms of the way that biodiversity is being represented in the curriculums, the way that environment is being represented, the way that climate change is being represented. And this is across the world. So it's not only in African countries, it's across the world that we have this weakness in our curricula. So this is a very important area to look at as you go forward with your change projects. We'll also put this report on the website for you. So it says here that 45% of national education documents that were studied made little to no reference to environmental themes. How can that be? at this point in human history. You see, our education system really must lift to the challenge, and we need all of you to help with this challenge. This is the the Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development, which came out of the most recent World ESD conference. And it's a lovely document. And what it says is that we need to ensure that ESD is a foundational element of our education systems at all levels, with environmental and climate action as a core curriculum component, while maintaining a holistic perspective on ESD that recognizes the interrelatedness of all dimensions of sustainable development. And then it also says that we need to implement ESD with joint emphasis on the cognitive skills, social and emotional learning, and action competencies for the individual and societal dimensions of transformation, promoting individual behavioral change for sustainable development, equality, and respect for human rights, as well as fundamental structural and cultural changes at the systemic level of economies and societies, also promoting the required political action to bring about the changes. And then the last item on this declaration to me is very important. It says, transformative learning for people and the planet is a necessity for our survival and that of future generations. The time to learn and act for our planet is now. So that's a very interesting and important statement, and I think it can guide us going forward. So T-learning will be in focus. We'll be working with you on T-learning to implement and develop transformative learning as we go forward. We'll be looking at T-learning in more detail as we go along. T-learning for teachers, you'll come across that in the program. And it links then to the Agenda 2030 roadmap, which has got these different priority action areas. A very important one is building the capacity of educators, which is what the SST program is trying to do. And we'll be working T-learning for teachers in the SST program as we go forward with you. So all of this, I think, is very important because the knowledge, the skills, the aptitudes, and the values necessary to industrialize the earth are not necessarily the same as those that will be needed to heal the earth or to build durable economies and good communities based on principles of equity and sustainability. So that's why I said we need to really reimagine education and how we work in education. So as we go forward, your tasks will be to try to develop an understanding of ESD. And I do hope that this little history has helped you a little bit with that. And we'll be working with you now through Learning Action 1 as we move forward. And we'd love to ask everybody to start working on Learning Action 1 in the online course. And then next week, we'll be moving to Learning Action 2 and 3. And then following that, we'll be moving to Learning Action 4, which is the focus on assessment. And then in October, we're going to focus on Learning Action 5. And all of that being centered around the change projects that you're going to work on. And I think tomorrow we'll be hearing more about the change projects. Am I right, Charles? So let me see now if I can close all of this. Yeah, there we are. Thank you very much, Patience. Thank you, colleagues.
Wow, thank you very much, Heila. That was really, really very insightful. I believe that we have listened very carefully. We've heard what has happened in time past, what we are doing right now, and the expectations for the future on issues relating to education for sustainable development. What is education for sustainable development? What would be your own contextual definition for education for sustainable development? And how would you move forward with all the resources that we have now to move forward and quickly? In fact, while others are walking, we have been advised to run. And I want to add, maybe we should fly, because running will not even help us to catch up with the rest of the world and with the enormity of the responsibilities that are, waiting for us to address, using education as the catalyst for achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And having listened very carefully, I don't know, I could see that some of our concerns have been addressed in the chat box. I don't know if there are some pressing things that we need to ask from the presenters so that we can immediately address them, because our time is fast spent since we had to wait for some people to join. But I'm happy that many more joined us during this session. Could we also listen if there is any very key ones that you want us to address so that the panelists can quickly speak to them before we close the session?
Thanks so much, Chair. There is a question from Akupa from the question and answer section. Should I read it or will you read it?
Yes, please.
So the question is, very interesting presentation from Prof. Heila. I am trying to think since 1972, the UN Conference on Environmental Issues, we are making progress in terms of reducing global warming through various initiatives. So the question is, are we making progress from 1972?
Yeah, thank you, Previn. I think that the jury is out on that, in the sense that it's a very, very big challenge. I think one of the main challenges is that we have to shift the paradigm of, if I could call it, pollution production, because the paradigm of pollution production produces carbon emissions into the air. And the paradigm of pollution production is it's very ubiquitous because it comes with the paradigm of burning of fossil fuel. So it's a very big thing and a very difficult thing to shift and to change. So I think that there has been progress made, because I think if we hadn't made all of these efforts that have been made, we would be in a much, much, much worse off situation than we are now. There is still a very big challenge, and the big challenge is to try to reduce the global warming to 1.5 degrees. We're currently moving towards 1.5 degrees, and if we can't reduce the carbon emissions globally, then we are going to overshoot 1.5 degree. And if we overshoot 1.5 degree in terms of mean or average temperature rise, we're facing a lot of challenges around the world. And unfortunately for us in Southern Africa, we are warming faster than other parts of the world. And that's got to do with the fact that the way that we're lying in the ocean, the way that the continent is sitting in the ocean and the ocean currents, and the way that you see what happens with climate change is the whole Earth system, the climatic system shifts, and that shifts ocean currents and all sorts of things, weather patterns. So we have many, many challenges. So we really need to, sharpen up all of our innovation skills. I think one of the most fantastic things that we do have in Africa at our disposal and for us to think about is the talent of young people. Many other continents are aging. They have aging populations. We have a young population. So we have the innovation of youth at our disposal, but as educators, we must be able to, create the environments for young people to be able to exercise their innovation and their agency going forward. So we're not out of the woods with the climate change crisis by any means, but we are going to have to, all of us, reimagine the way that we live and how to do things innovatively, collectively, and so on. Yeah, and come up with good solutions and, draw on our communities for good knowledge as well. We've seen such good examples in SADC where, people have gone back into the ways that they used to produce food and draw on a much wider range of knowledge in order to produce a more diversity of food, which is one way of addressing some of the impacts of climate change. It's not the only one, but, these are the kinds of things that we should be able to do. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much for that response. Is there any other pressing question you have found?
No further questions, Chair.
Okay. Well, because if there's no other question, Carolyn, do you have any comment you may want to make before we close?
Patients,
thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to say good luck to all of us. It's our EST course. It's about not only about theories, concepts, but really trying to help together address the climate change and all the development issues. Thank you. Thank you, patients. Thank you, Heila.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Yes, Heila.
No,
any final words?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to Carolyn also for the presentation. I think she gave such a great background to education and showing the spaces in the education system where we can also think about, you know, bringing innovations and centering the importance of supporting the work with teachers. And I always like to use this idea of future teachers. You know, we often talk about those in our colleges and in our universities as students, but I think about them as future teachers, because if you think about them as future teachers rather than your students, you can think about them differently, you know. So I think if we can think about ourselves and our future teachers as a very powerful force for change, then we can, you know, open up some of these things and just work on them wherever we can and whatever we can do. It's not possible for everybody to do everything, but let's do the bits that we can. Yeah. And I think tomorrow we'll be talking about the Change Project. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Thank you very much, Heila. Thank you very much, our audience, for staying on till now. And thank you for all that we have been able to do. The ball is now in your court. And I hope we are all being motivated enough to begin to think of how we will go through this course. In other words, we do not expect that any of us will drop off the bus, but that we all arrive safely, you know, at the end of the course to say, yes, we are ready to carry on through with our innovations. And tomorrow we'll be having more skills on how to go ahead to begin this work or to continue this work, because I believe many of us have been engaged in these transformative approaches to work, and we want to do even much more. And the skills to do so, we will get during this course. So we want to wish us the very best in this course and active participation as we move along. Thank you very much for your attention and have a good day. Thank you for the technical team. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, patients.
Thank you very much.